They left her to freeze beneath a collapsing ranch shed while the worst winter in decades swallowed Red Hollow Valley whole. But they never imagined a lone cowboy would ride through the storm and change her fate forever. The wind tore across the plains without mercy, driving snow into every crack and corner of the abandoned spread north of Dustin Ridge. Inside a broken tool shed leaning against time and ice, Eliza Harrow lay curled in frozen hay, her body trembling from hunger and cold. 3 days had passed since she last ate. Maybe 4. The ache inside her stomach had dulled into something dangerous, a hollow weakness that made even breathing feel heavy. Snow slipped through the warped boards and kissed her skin like tiny blades. She pulled her torn shawl tighter, but it did nothing against a winter determined to finish what her town had started. Once, she had been their healer. Once, they rode miles to seek her hands when fevers burned and bones broke. She delivered their children. She stitched their wounds. But when sickness claimed 3 young lives before the first frost, fear needed a face, and they chose hers. Sheriff Calvin Broad stood before the church and declared misfortune never arrived without cause. The preacher followed with warnings about hidden evil among them. Whispers spread when someone pointed to the pale crescent birthmark resting near Eliza's collarbone. By nightfall, neighbors she had known since childhood stood outside her home with ropes. Jonah Harrow, her husband, tried to shield her, but the mob struck him down into the snow. They gave them a cruel choice: leave before sunrise or hang in the town square. With no horse, no wagon, and no food, they were driven into the gathering storm. They walked north through blinding wind, Jonah's steps growing weaker with every mile. By morning, he could no longer stand. Eliza dragged him into the abandoned shed she once visited years before to treat a ranch hand's broken wrist. She remembered sunlight then, dust and golden beams. Laughter. Now it felt like a grave. Jonah's hand grew colder in hers until it stopped gripping back. She buried him behind the shed with a rusted shovel she found half buried in snow, carving his name into 2 crossed boards with shaking fingers. Since that day, she had scratched a mark into the shed wall for every sunrise she survived without him. 29 jagged lines stared back at her now. 29 days of silence. 29 nights of coyotes howling beyond the drifts while hunger hollowed her thinner. She tried once to walk toward the main road, but darkness swallowed her vision before she made it past the fence line. The storm outside was worse now. It would kill her long before mercy ever found her. Crawling toward the doorway, she pushed aside a loose plank and stared at the endless white swallowing sky and earth alike. Perhaps this was how death arrived, not with violence, but with quiet surrender. Her stomach cramped sharply, stealing her breath. Tears slid down her frozen cheeks for the first time since Jonah died. She closed her eyes, ready to let the cold finish its work. Then through the roar of wind came another sound, distant but steady. Hoofbeats. At first she thought it a trick of a starving mind. But the rhythm grew clearer, nearer. A horse pushing through deep snow. A low voice urging it forward. The shed door groaned as it was forced open, and snow burst inward in a violent swirl. Eliza scrambled backward, heart pounding, certain the men from Dustin Ridge had returned to end her. Instead, a tall figure filled the doorway, broad shoulders outlined against the white storm, hat pulled low, coat heavy with frost. He stepped inside and shut out the wind, his sharp eyes adjusting to the dim light before settling on her frail form against the wall. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice roughened by miles on the trail, the stranger spoke. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "what are you doing out here alone?" The cowboy who stepped into that broken shed did not look like salvation. He looked like another hard man carved from winter, but he would become the only reason she lived to see spring. He crossed the threshold slowly, pulling the door shut against the screaming wind, and the sudden quiet inside felt heavy and uncertain. Up close, Eliza could see the sharp angles of his face, the week's growth of dark stubble along his jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds scanning every corner of the shed before returning to her. He took in the hollow of her cheeks, the tremor in her hands, the way she tried and failed to push herself upright. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly, not accusing, just stating a fact. She let out a brittle laugh that barely carried sound. "Neither should you." His gaze drifted to the wooden cross half buried in snow behind the shed. He understood more than she had spoken. Without another question, he crouched and unslung his saddlebag. The smell hit her first: bread, cured beef, something warm wrapped in cloth. Her stomach twisted violently. He held the food out, but did not force it into her hands. Slow, he warned. If it's been days, you eat too fast, you'll be worse off. She stared at him, suspicion flickering behind exhaustion. Why? She whispered. Why help me? He paused only a second before answering. Because I found you. As if that were reason enough. She took the bread with shaking fingers. The first bite hurt. The second brought tears she could not stop. He looked away to give her what dignity he could while she ate like someone rescued from drowning. When she finished, he poured water from his canteen and waited until her breathing steadied. Name's Colt Maddox, he said at last. I ride the northern cattle routes. Cabin's about 5 miles from here, tucked near Whispering Pine Creek. 5 miles might as well have been 50 in her condition. He seemed to read the doubt in her eyes. You won't make it on your own, he said. It wasn't cruel. It was true. When she tried to stand, her legs folded beneath her. Colt moved quickly, catching her before she hit the frozen floor. She expected him to hesitate, to reconsider the burden she clearly was. Instead, he lifted her as though she weighed nothing and carried her through the storm toward his horse. The ride north blurred into fragments. The steady rhythm of hooves breaking crusted snow, Colt's arm firm around her to keep her upright, the wind clawing at them as if angry at losing its prey. When the cabin finally emerged between dark pines, smoke curling faintly from its chimney, Eliza thought she might be dreaming. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like something almost painful. Real heat, real shelter. Colt set her carefully beside the stone hearth and fed the fire until flames leapt higher. The cabin was simple: one table, one bed, a rough shelf lined with tin cups, and a few books worn soft at the edges. A life built for solitude. He moved with quiet efficiency, pouring broth into a bowl and placing it in her hands. Slow, he repeated. She obeyed. Strength crept back into her fingers in small, stinging waves. For a long while, only the crackle of fire filled the room. Then he spoke without looking at her. They run you out. She nodded. Words came halting at first, then steadier as the warmth thawed more than her skin. She told them about Dustin Rich, about the fever, about Sheriff Broad and the preacher and the ropes, about Jonah collapsing in the snow. Colt listened without interruption, jaw tightening slightly at certain parts but offering no dramatic reaction. When she finished, silence settled again. Silver Bend did the same thing once, he said finally. She looked up. To who? My mother. The words seemed dragged from somewhere deep. She knew plants, remedies. Folks came to her until something went wrong. Then they called it witchcraft. He met her eyes across the fire. They burned her greenhouse first. Said it was cleansing. Eliza felt something shift between them. Not pity, not even sympathy, but recognition. He understood what it meant to be cast out by fear. You stayed? She asked. No, he said simply. Learned early not to wait for mercy. Night fell hard outside the cabin windows. For the first time in weeks, Eliza did not feel the immediate threat of death pressing in. Exhaustion finally overtook her, heavy and unavoidable. Colt rose and placed an extra blanket over her shoulders before taking a seat near the door, rifle resting across his lap out of habit more than fear. Just before sleep claimed her, she found herself speaking again. They won't stop looking. Colt's voice answered steady and certain from across the room. Let them look. The fire burned low. Snow continued to fall beyond the pines. But inside that cabin, for the first time since she was driven into the storm, Eliza Harrow was not alone, and the winter no longer felt invincible. They came at dawn 3 days later, just as the storm finally loosened its grip on the valley. Hoofbeats echoed through Whispering Pine Creek, sharp and unmistakable against the frozen ground. Eliza was standing near the cabin window when she saw them. Sheriff Broad at the front, rope coiled at his saddle, half a dozen men riding behind him with the same hard fear in their eyes she remembered from the night they drove her out. For a moment, the old terror tried to take hold again. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. But she was no longer starving in a broken shed. She was standing on solid ground, and she was not alone. Colt stepped onto the porch before the riders could dismount. His rifle rested easy in his hands, not raised, but not lowered either. The men slowed, uncertain now that they had reached the edge of his land. Snow crunched beneath boots as Sheriff Broad stepped forward. "She belongs in Dustin Ridge," he called out. "This don't concern you, Maddox." Colt's voice stayed level. "Everything on this side of the creek concerns me." The men shifted uneasily. They had expected a frightened woman, not resistance. Eliza opened the cabin door and stepped out beside Colt before doubt could return. The cold air bit at her face, but she kept her shoulders straight. Murmurs spread through the group at the sight of her standing, alive, stronger than when they had left her to die. "Our cattle are sick," one rancher shouted. "Children coughing again. And you rode north to hang me for it?" Eliza asked, her voice carrying more steadily than she felt. "Or did you ride north because it's easier to blame me than to look at what's really poisoning your town?" Sheriff Broad sneered, but uncertainty flickered behind it. She stepped forward another pace. "The new mining operation upstream," she continued. "They've been washing waste into the creek. I saw the discoloration before the first frost. I warned you." A few men exchanged glances. One of them muttered that the water had tasted strange lately. Doubt spread the way fear once had. Colt remained silent beside her, but his presence was solid as the cabin behind them. "Test the water," Eliza said. "Boil from the east well for a week. If I'm wrong, I'll ride back with you myself." The challenge hung in the air. Broad's authority wavered as the other men began murmuring more openly now. They had lost children once already. If there was even a chance she spoke truth, they could not ignore it. Reluctantly, they turned their horses. It took 4 days. 4 days of tension and waiting while riders traveled south to confirm her claim. 4 days where Colt kept watch and Eliza prepared what remedies she could in case the sick were brought north instead. When the riders returned, they did not come with ropes. They came with silence. The mining company had indeed been dumping waste into the creek. Livestock downstream showed signs of mercury sickness. A territorial agent was already investigating. Sheriff Broad did not meet Eliza's eyes when he delivered the news. The anger that once fueled him had nowhere to go now. "You were wrong," Colt said quietly, not mocking, just stating fact. Broad swallowed his pride. "Seems we were." The men left without another word. Spring arrived slowly after that. Snow melted along Whispering Pine Creek, revealing stubborn green shoots pushing through thawed earth. Word spread that Eliza Harrow had been right. Some families rode north in apology. Others came quietly for medicine when fever lingered in their homes. She helped them all, not because they deserved it, but because she was a healer, and that was something fear had failed to take from her. A small healing room was added to Colt's cabin by early summer. He built it with steady hands, never asking for thanks. She filled it with herbs, tinctures, and knowledge carried forward instead of buried. One evening, as the sky burned gold beyond the pines, Colt stood beside her near the creek where ice once ruled. "When I found you," he said, "I figured I was pulling someone back from the edge." She looked at him, stronger now than she had ever been in Dustin Ridge. "You were," she answered softly, "but I chose to step back." He nodded once, understanding the difference. They had abandoned her to starve and die in winter. But winter had not claimed her. Fear had not broken her. And the lonely cowboy who found her did more than save her life. He gave her the chance to reclaim it. When spring settled fully over Red Hollow Valley, Eliza no longer felt like something left behind. She felt rooted. And this time, no storm would drive her out.